Cassidy Quinn, and this is Mentally Together. Because whether you can see it on the surface or not, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. And no matter what our brains are experiencing, we're not alone, we're together. And yes, today we are back here together again, finally, for another interview episode. I know, it's been a while, but I am very excited to put out this episode into the world with the wonderful and very wise Ivan Maisel. Ivan Maisel is an award-winning reporter and writer who has been covering college football for almost 4 decades. For huge outlets, okay? We're talking like ESPN, Sports Illustrated. Now he writes for On3.com, where he is senior writer and vice president of Editorial. I love getting to interview different people on this podcast for a million reasons, one of which being I get to connect with them and relate to them, and I feel like there's always some way in which all of us can relate to each other. Hopefully you feel that listening too. And sometimes the relating is just on a basic human level of like, yeah, we all struggle sometimes, we will all grieve, we will all experience loss, we all have mental health. And then other times the relating is on a much deeper level. And that is the case with Ivan. 8 years ago, Ivan's son Max died by suicide. And it has now been almost 2 years since my mom died by suicide. And that still feels really hard to say and really weird to say because, well, yeah, it's always going to be hard. And it's not something that I've said yet on this podcast or like publicly on the internet. And that's not because I don't want to talk about it or because I don't think it's super, super important to talk about, but I just wasn't ready to form the words. I think I just needed to be able to process and grieve on my own, and not just like by myself in my own little bubble, but with my family, with my dad and my brother and my mom's sisters and my mom's friends and my close friends and family, and just be able to process it on our own before trying to figure out exactly how to talk about it. And that's so hard because like I work in the mental health space, and so I feel like I should be the one breaking down the stigma, saying all the things, knowing exactly how to talk about it, being super open about it, but somehow it became this thing that was really hard to say and figure out what to say and when it was going to be the right time to say it. At some point, I think I will probably be in a place where I'll want to talk more about it, but for right now, I just wanted to share that little bit as we get into this conversation because it's something that I obviously connected really deeply about with Ivan. And I was open with him about the fact that I hadn't shared it publicly yet, and so I would be doing the interview as if I was not a fellow suicide loss survivor, but I did share with him about my mom. And it was nice to have that connection. The worst connection, obviously, the connection that both of us wish we did not share. But since we do, it's nice to connect. Editing this episode was so wild, just listening back to the conversation, because somehow we recorded this over a year ago. And so you'll hear me, I think, mention at some point in our conversation that it's been 7 months since we lost my mom. And now it's been almost 2 years. So I can tell listening just how different of a place I was in when it comes to processing and grieving the loss of my mom. A year ago, I was definitely in a place of feeling a lot of guilt, which can be something that's very common with this specific type of loss. The idea that I could have done something to change the outcome, saved my mom. And I think that's something that I will probably struggle with forever, but with lots of therapy and time and healing, whatever, that is not the place my brain is in now most days. But it is something you'll hear me ask Ivan about in this conversation. His advice for anyone who's lost someone to suicide, who might be struggling with some of those guilty or what if feelings. And in that moment, I was definitely asking Ivan, for advice for myself. And of course, everyone else who can relate, but I really needed to hear it for myself. Ivan's family chose to be very open and transparent about how Max died from the beginning. And with Ivan's job, he was working for ESPN at the time, when Max went missing, it became a national news story. And I cannot relate to that part, but I can relate to this, that Ivan says one of the few things that he and his family allowed themselves to smile about in the darkest, earliest days of losing Max is the fact that Max hated being in the spotlight, and so he would hate the fact that his name was in all of these headlines and his picture was all over TV screens. And my mom was similar to Max in that way. She didn't love her picture being taken. She didn't want to be the center of attention. And so she would probably already hate how much I've said about her on this podcast. But I'm sorry, Mom. I love you. And I want to talk about you so that everybody gets to know you and everybody remembers you. And yeah, but that's all I'm going to say about you for right now. Okay, you're safe for today because we're talking about Ivan and we're talking about Max. So here's what you need to know about Ivan and Max before we get into our conversation. Max was 21 years old. He was a college student at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where he was studying photography. He loved video games, Broadway musicals, comedy, and cereal. One little story that I love is that for Max's 18th birthday, they got him 18 different boxes of cereal. And I only know that story because Ivan shares it in his book. It's called I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, a memoir of loss, grief, and love. It's a beautiful book that made me cry and smile. Ivan writes and speaks so openly about Max's life, Max's death, the stigma around suicide and men's mental health, and Ivan's discovery that grief is love. So I'm honored that he took the time to talk to me and you, of course, about all of this. Talking to Ivan, I could just feel his love for Max. I could feel his grief that he continues to honor and the healing that he's been through and continues to go through. And really, this conversation was healing for me too. So let's get into it he's an author, he's a professional sports fan, and an amazing dad, of course. It's Ivan Maisel. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you. I have been looking forward to this, and I feel like I have a million questions for you, which I know we will not get to all of them, but that is just how it goes when there's someone like you who has shared so much with the world and been so open through some really shitty things, I can say. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for writing about Max and sharing so much of him with all of us. It means a lot.
Thanks. And that's really the reaction I was hoping the book would receive. It's always gratifying when you have a message and people understand it in the manner in which you intended it. And I have been struck by the number of people that have just very quietly said to me, I get, this was helpful, or I gave it to somebody who's been struggling, and that's why I did it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's helped me. I'm sure it's helped so many people that have read it and continue to. And I think I love how many just little tidbits and memories about Max you share throughout the book, because I'm sure I'm not the first person that said it makes me feel like I got to know Max through reading it. And I'm curious, is there, as you talked about in your book and other interviews I've seen you do, and I relate to this a lot, that when people actually talk about Max and you get to share stories, it kind of keeps him alive in a way. So I'm curious if
it does.
Yeah. I'm curious if there's a memory or something about Max that just feels kind of current in your brain today.
Well, that's interesting. I've been thinking about him in terms of our younger daughter Elizabeth, whose birthday is tomorrow, and
oh, happy birthday.
we have a photo of the two of them together, and he didn't like to have his photo taken, and he didn't smile when we forced him to, but there was an event. I forget which family event it was, but he was wearing a blazer and she was wearing a nice dress. And he put his arm around her shoulders and he almost smiled. And I saw that photo the other day. So I've been thinking about that. And the other thing I would tell you is, and I didn't discover this until after the book came out, what I kind of figured out is if somebody comes to us with a story about Max, it's really a gift.
Yeah.
And because as I wrote in the book, we have a finite number of memories. And we had a gathering of our friends right when the book was published, and Max's fourth grade teacher came to the party. And she told me this wonderful story of Max in the colonial play in fourth grade, which, we live in New England, so there's a colonial play. And quiet, shy Max was Patrick Henry. And she said when he pounded the table and he screamed, "Give me liberty or give me death," she said the whole class, as well as the teacher herself, were all like, "Whoa, Max, all right." And the attitude toward him changed it after he did that. And
wow.
So that's a great example of a story that I didn't know and would never have known that, we heard. And it really is a gift.
Do you magically remember all of those? Like when someone tells you a story, does it just check into your brain and it's now in the memory bank? Or do you, like, I have started a Google Doc where if someone tells me a story about my mom, I go and add it over there because I'm like, I'm not going to remember this. I already feel like I've forgotten half of my actual memories of me and my mom. So now I don't want to forget all the other memories of everybody else shares. But so do you somehow remember them?
I don't do that. And some have come in emails. His online friends have emailed me some things, and which of course I have, but that one stuck with me probably because it was the first. And actually, if I'm being completely honest, his mother, Meg, is my wife, she remembers a lot of things that I don't in general. So I probably should write these down because I don't, a lot of what it just goes in one ear and out the other because I'm thinking about something else. So good idea. Well taken. And I will start doing that.
Only because I'm just always so nervous that I'll forget everything, which I guess is just me anyway. And my grief brain of like, I'm going to forget all the things about my mom. Oh my God.
No, I know. And it's hard because that gets sort of down to the essential question of you have to go on and you can't stay behind with this person. You can just carry with them as much as you can. And that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I love one of the big takeaways from your book sounds pretty simple, but obviously not an easy place to get to necessarily, that grief is love, right? Yes. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, the way I arrived at that was just first the realization that I was going to carry this grief for the rest of my life. And I came to that relatively soon, a few weeks out. Yeah, and I think originally, of course, you think, well, I'm going to get through this. Well, what does get through this mean? You don't get through losing someone like this, a child or a mother or a spouse. You learn to carry the grief with you as you continue on in your life. And I started thinking, okay, well, once I realized it was permanent, I just sort of then began to focus, well, why does it hurt so much? And I sort of thought, well, it hurts that much because I loved him that much. And honestly, that's kind of a lot of times that's how I think in terms of my writing. The sports writing that I do is using metaphors and similes to try to explain something I've seen. And once I hit on the idea of, the grief was equal to the love. Then it was just trying to figure out how to say that. And all of us as writers pare away as many words as we can to get to the essence of what we're trying to convey. And I thought, well, grief is love. It's the form of love it's the form that your love takes after you lose a person and they're not there anymore to love you back. And that whole idea was not only sort of the impetus for the book, but really helped me keep going, for lack of a better phrase, just the sense of, okay, this is why it hurts so much. And once I understood why it hurt so much, I was better able to deal with it.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense that then that helps kind of process the fact that it's not going away. Like your love for Max will never go away. So why would this grief?
Well,
right?
Yeah, right. And somebody, a friend of mine whose husband died not long after Max, a couple of years after Max, said to me, she had read Grief is the Price We Pay for Love. And I've read that in a couple of places, and it's a lovely sentiment as well. But I didn't like the price we pay. That focused more on the pain than I thought I wanted to focus on. To me, thinking of grief as love just made it a little warmer and a little more palatable and a little less painful, and got me to a place to where I could continue to function and continue to live my life without without feeling like I would never feel good again. And as we talk about this 7 years later, it all just sounds so easy, but obviously it wasn't. And I've telescoped many, many months into a paragraph, but that's what worked for me. Your mileage may vary, but that idea of trying to sand away the pain or just look at grief differently really helped me.
Yeah. So now, like you said, it has been 7 years.
Yes.
But as we've just talked about, grief does not end. What I've been, because of course, the last 7 months for me, it's been, I've read a lot of books about grief and read that one thing I read was that it doesn't go away, but it just changes.
Yes.
So I could imagine that would be true for you even 7 years later.
Yes. And again, I got into this a little bit in the book. A neighbor of ours had lost her husband suddenly, and she said to me, a few years ahead of Max, so she was a few years ahead of me on this track. And she said, and this has been very helpful, was really very helpful at the outset and remains helpful, that experiencing grief is like standing at the seashore, and sometimes the wave washes over your ankles and sometimes it washes over your head. But in both cases, it goes back out. And once you understand, at least for me, once I understood that, okay, I had a good 10 minutes, or I had a good hour, or I had a good half a day. Once you see that happen, that you are moving forward. When you're not having a good 10 minutes, when you're not having a good day, it's not forever, because initially that grief just is so overwhelming, and you think, how am I ever going to keep going? But you do. And once I realized that the pain, when it felt bad, that it wasn't permanent, that I was just had to let it happen, let it wash over me, let it go back out, and then I would be okay again. That really helped me as well.
Yeah, that is such a good metaphor. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Are there things that you do now to make sure, whether it's daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, to just kind of make sure that you are still checking in with your grief and letting it out? Or do you just wait till those waves come and then deal with it from there?
That's a really good question, because I don't do it consciously
Mm.
all the time. I do it consciously once, periodically, and I ask our daughters, how you doing with your grief? How you doing with your brother? But, I will just sort of talk to Max every once in a while, maybe just to say hello, or how you doing, or I wonder where you'd be now. I just sort of say that out loud, or I think about it. And I think that's essentially what you're asking me. I mean, I think that's the form it takes in my life. Is I just, I used to, when he was little, I'd call him Maxie Boy, and so I'll sort of wake up and lay in bed and just go, Maxie Boy, and I think about him, and then I get up and start my day. But he has that presence in my thinking, and he never, obviously it doesn't really go away, but that's how it takes that's how he comes to the front of my brain.
Yeah. And of course, like you said, he's always there, but sometimes you're totally thinking about him and focused on it, and sometimes he's just hanging out in the background. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you obviously been a reporter for a very long time. You have covered a million topics. I don't mean very long time. You've had a lot of experience as a reporter. You've covered a bunch of topics, but grief was one that you say you shied away from, not just in your work, but in your day-to-day life before.
Oh God, yes.
Before you couldn't, right? Before you couldn't avoid it anymore.
Of course, yeah, no, and actually, when I was first confronted with it, I avoided it. My father died 15 years ago, and I just handled it so poorly. I handled it poorly as a son. I handled it poorly as a father to my children, but I was scared of it. I was scared of that pain, and so I just stepped around it and didn't deal with it effectively. And what a disservice I did, really, to me, to our kids, and to my dad. I mean, he was diagnosed with cancer, I guess, 10 months before he died, and I didn't, I didn't really rally to his defense, or to help him, or to just, sit with him or anything. I was just scared of it. And, what a mistake, what a loss.
But I think that's I think that's so relatable. I mean, I know that even you talking about what we talked about a few minutes ago of like, oh yes, bring up the person, tell me stories about them. Don't just avoid talking about this person who died, because you're not going to remind me that they're dead, or remind me to think about them, right? Like, it's always there, even if we're not talking about it.
And even, and in his last months, I didn't want to bring up, the illness, I'm pretty sure he knew he was sick. I mean, it's just, it's just silly. Not silly, but it was just fear and discomfort. And I have spent a lot of my life being really good at avoiding both of those things. And so when I couldn't avoid it anymore, boy, I got walloped. And nothing would ever prepare you for what we went through. I mean, nothing would have ever prepared us, but it was, I was woefully, I had no tools in that toolbox. So got them now.
Thank goodness. Now, finally. Tools you wish you never needed to learn.
Well, obviously. You're right. You don't wish you had them, but if you live long enough, then you need them. You're going to lose somebody. That's just how the thing works.
Yeah. And then when you think about it, that means that everybody around you at any point in your day, people that you walk by on the street, either have experienced that or are going to. And so shouldn't we just talk about it, because we're all trying to figure it out.
Exactly. And that thought, what was really interesting in the aftermath of Max's disappearance and his death at the beginning, we really didn't know what happened. People would very quietly come to me and say, my brother ended his life. My sister was murdered 20 years ago. My mom, my dad, my roommate in college, da da da. And these were people, da da da. I'm saying like it was nothing, but these were people that I knew and had been friends with or acquaintances with for years, and I saw that they carried that loss with them and were functioning in a way that I didn't know they had lost. They had suffered such a grievous loss. And to see them as examples of a life that can be lived carrying that kind of grief helped me greatly. And it wasn't really anything that somebody said in terms of this is how you need to carry your grief. I just thought, well, gee, I've known her for 20 years. I didn't know that. And wow, okay, maybe I can do this, or maybe it's possible to live that sort of life. That was very helpful to me.
Yeah.
Thinking that way.
And I'm sure you sharing this and continuing to is helpful for others. Like, oh, okay, 7 years down the line, he's still grieving and still talking about it. And that's good. And
pay it forward
forever. Yeah. So thank you. And that what you just said of people, when you start sharing something, a lot of times people will start sharing how they relate to that and opening up. And I think that's true a lot when it comes to things like anxiety and depression and mental illness in general. Have you, trying to think of what I actually want to ask you to follow that up.
Well, I would put it this way, in terms of mental illness, and we made a decision early on in talking about Max that we were going to be open about it because he was sick. And I think the basic issue in American society is when we talk about mental health or mental illness, we always focus on the first word, and we really need to focus on the second word. That if it's an illness, Max was sick, and we have trouble viewing it that way. We're getting a lot better at it than we used to be, but the brain is an organ, just as the heart is, just as the kidney is, and something can go wrong inside of it. But we somehow have this misbegotten notion that we're in control of that we should be able to control that when something does go wrong.
Yeah.
And we can through therapy or medication or both or whatever, but because it's not something that's visible or that the effects of it are not physically visible, that's hard for people to understand, and it's much easier to make fun of it and to have a laugh about it at someone else's expense. And hey, I've done plenty of that in my life. But mental illness needs sunlight. We need to talk about it. We need to discuss it the way we discuss cancer. My parents' generation, you didn't really talk about cancer publicly.
Yeah.
You said it quietly. Sometimes you didn't even tell whoever had the illness that that's what it was.
Wow.
So if we talk about it and get it out in the open, then you own it. You're in control of it. And I did, honestly, we all, the four of us, didn't want anyone to interpret silence about Max as that we were ashamed of him, because we weren't. He was different. He was a quirky kid. He had grown up to be a quirky young man, but he had a lot of attributes as well, and we loved him, still love him, and I just didn't. I thought, we're going to talk about him, And uh, you know, not only the other thing about talking about him is you don't have to keep up with, who you're telling what to. Are we just going to talk about this to the family? Are we just going to talk about this to family and friends?
Where's the line?
Yeah, it's much easier to not have to think about it. It's like you don't have to remember who you lied to. Not that it would be a lie to be quiet, but it's the same principle. If you just talk about it, like he was sick and he died, which he was, and he did, then it's just it's freeing. You don't have to, that burden of remembering who you're talking to about it is not there. And we had plenty of other burdens to deal with in those early days.
Right. Yeah. If there's anything you can remove on your pile of crap.
Exactly. Yeah. Well put. Yeah.
Very poetic. I don't have the words that you use, Ivan, but there's my metaphor. Yeah. Obviously you mentioned in the book that we live in a time when there's not as much of a stigma around suicide and mental illness, but I think to some extent it does still exist, although we're working to break it down. Do you feel that stigma at all?
I feel it around. I don't feel it personally, but I think my generation, some people still have trouble with it. I think your generation is much better about being open and honest about mental health, and
we like to overshare. No.
Yeah, no, maybe that's a plus of social media. That people your age are a lot more ready to ask for help, and that's a good thing, and that can only help. And I don't know. There's great concern about the rise in mental health issues and the rise in suicide, and the numbers are what the numbers are. But I think part of it being more in the open now is that people feel less of a stigma. Maybe all this was there all along. I don't know, but I'm sure there's more now because of all the stresses that social media puts on young people, and as well as older, but in the way it's rewired all of our brains. But I think being open is not a bad thing.
Yeah. And I think part of it, when we all keep sharing what we've gone through, it, even if someone hasn't gone through the same thing, there's a level of empathy that kind of has to automatically get built up, because you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. And I think with suicide and mental illness in general, it can be really hard to understand and relate to someone that's going through it or has gone through it if you've never had those feelings yourself. And so again, I really appreciate all the things you share about Max throughout the book, because I feel like everybody reading it has to connect with Max in some way, whether you like taking pictures or you like cereal or you like going to musicals, or you like all of them, or you like playing video game, or you like anime, or collecting. Do you collect Pokemon cards? So Pokemon
he
cards?
did. Yes, he did. Yeah, we have plenty of those. We do.
So I think being able to like connect to someone just on a tiny level. Oh, I love eating cereal. I wish my parents got me 18 boxes of cereal on my 18th birthday, which is such a wonderful story. How can you not start to relate and go, okay, I can see a little bit into this person's brain and understand it, where he's at. Is that something you hope people get from telling his story?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, I didn't write the book. That's a great question. I didn't write the book to grab people by the lapels and say, you need to know about my son. Because that's not really, that's my needs. That's not the reader, and I didn't want to write. I understand the impulse to do that. But I think because I have spent my entire career writing to an audience, I was reluctant to do so, and for for me, put my needs in there. And I think writing a book about someone who has died, just to tell the reader who that person was, to me, it felt self-indulgent. I didn't want to write a book unless I thought I could help people. And of course, in writing the book, I wanted to explain who Max was. Of course, it wouldn't have been the story wouldn't have been as rich if I hadn't. But my primary focus was really, this is how I dealt with my grief. Maybe it will help you. And I didn't write it cathartically. I felt like I needed to have my legs under me before I could write. Cathartic, I just didn't really, I think that's asking something of the reader for your own benefit. So I didn't want to do that either. But if, I, as you did at the outset, people have said to me, I feel when I finished the book, I felt like I knew Max. And that's a great feeling, because he didn't let a lot of people know him.
Yeah. And I think then maybe it helps people see, or just go, okay, if I can understand a little bit about this person, and this person was struggling so much and was in so much pain that they had to take their own life, then maybe that connects with something and says, okay, I can't necessarily understand exactly what they were feeling that led to this moment, but at least I can see them as a human and see that that's, I don't know, a human thing.
That's about, it's about the best you can ask for. And I think you hit on something very important, that idea of he was in so much pain that this was the best solution to stop the pain. That's hard to hear, but it makes a lot of sense. And I almost felt really a sense of gratitude towards him that he hung in there for 21 years and a month and a week, that knowing now the pain that he was in. And I think he did that for us, because he knew that this would not be easy to deal with. He knew that his loss would not be easy to deal with, but the pain was even greater than that.
Yeah. He loved you all and cared about you all, and yet it wasn't enough.
Right.
And I know, they always talk about all these stages of grief and elements of grief or whatever. I think the stages are just like things you'll feel at some point, and maybe you'll come back to them, whatever.
In no particular order. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think obviously, depending on the different types of loss you're experiencing, the grief is different. And one thing that I know about suicide loss, there can definitely be a big component of guilt and like, why couldn't I see this? And what is there? And these are the things that everyone says, okay, you can't go through, just like you talked in your book, you can't go down those guilt holes and rabbit holes about regret, because it's not going to do anybody any good. And you guys did every single thing that you could to keep Max going, and Max did everything he could to keep going. But there might be people listening who are feeling some of those guilt moments pop up. And what would you say to that?
The best advice I got about that, or not really advice, it was more wisdom. There's a woman who is a psychologist at Duke who I grew up with, and she deals with trauma and loss. And she called me the week Max disappeared. And I mean, our mothers were best friends, and her, this woman's name is Robin Gerwich, on the faculty at Duke. And Robin and I hadn't spoken since we were teenagers. But she called me and we talked for 90 minutes, and I mostly listened. But two things that I carried away that really helped me. One, I would never understand why Max did this, because I think rationally, and anybody who decides to end their life is no longer thinking rationally in the way that we understand rational thought to be. So I thought, okay, I understand that, and that makes sense to me, so I'm going to use that. The other
You're
thing she
thinking
said,
rationally about that comment about rational thinking. You're
yeah,
like, yes,
exactly,
rationally, I get that. Yep.
yeah, and the other thing she said that spoke more to, again, and this might be uh, too rational of thinking for a lot of people, but she said, unless someone tells you that at this hour, on this day, at this place, I am going to end my life, you cannot stop them. And that really helped me too, because I understood this was an issue that was much greater than I was equipped to handle. I am not a mental health professional. And, people now ask me to talk about mental health in general. And I say to them, look, I am not an expert in mental health. I am an expert in one case of mental health that didn't end very well. But
that's impossible to be an expert in, because you'll never know exactly what was going through Max's mind.
Exactly.
So it's
I'm an
like,
expert only in the sense that I know a lot about it.
Yeah.
So that all of that, I decided to give myself, and I saved completely freely that it may just be a very elaborate get out of jail free card I have given myself, in this Monopoly game. But I just decided I wasn't going to take that on. And not everybody responds that way. I think, and of course I have guilt about my relationship with Max, just as I have guilt about my relationship with my father when he was dying, but I can't do anything about it. And maybe it's age, or maybe it's wisdom, born of age. I don't know, but I just thought that I can't do anything about it. Why am I going to torture myself about it? And his mother and his sisters think about that whole issue differently than I do, and we're all cool with each other. If that, they feel how they feel, and they're sure there's something they could have done or said, and I'm just not going to go there.
Yeah, and it's so hard.
Yeah, well, it to me, it's just a no-win proposition. Look, there are plenty of things in my relationship with my wife and with my daughters that I wish I had done differently. And the only difference is with them, I can try to make amends. And that's or ask for forgiveness. And and with Max, I can't make amends, and I can ask for forgiveness, but I can't get it from him. I got to get it from somewhere else.
Yeah, what my therapist always tells me is that if I'm talking about things that I regret or feel guilty about, she says, okay, you can't change them, but can you turn those into ways to move forward, things to do things differently in the future with the people that are still around me, and with myself. So are there ways that you've started having difficult conversations about mental health with your immediate family or friends, or just ways you've checked in on people, made sure they're asking for help and getting help? Are there ways that you move through life differently now?
Absolutely. I'm much more, I'm much less reticent to bring it up. If I think somebody is struggling, I will bring it up. And if I'm talking to them about it, or if they initiate the conversation, I ask very pointed questions, because A, they brought it up, and B, they know that I know, they know that I've paid a very heavy price in this deal, and they know that I'm not asking questions to be titillated or to because it's a really juicy story. It's I am by nature probably an introvert, and in terms of dealing with people. So sometimes I have to force myself to ask somebody how they're doing, but it's not out of any hesitation toward mental illness. It's just basically my own personality, you know. And the other thing I would say, just before I forget, the other thing I would say about forgiveness is, and I've just read this in the last few years, that if you, as someone that has always beaten themselves up about everything, if I treated others, if I treated myself with the same compassion that I try to give others, so sometimes you just have to ask yourself for forgiveness. And I think that's where I've made a little bit of progress.
Yeah. Like if somebody else told me this, that they did, what would I probably give them a hug and say, it's okay, you couldn't have done anything differently, and
right,
you're amazing, and keep going, or whatever,
yeah,
and do that to yourself. Yeah, that's
right,
beautiful.
yeah, that's exactly it. And it's hard to do.
Yeah,
we're all harder on ourselves than we should be.
absolutely. You also talk in the book about the stereotype of men specifically not wanting to ask for help, whether it's, I think you referenced asking for directions in the book, but
Yes.
also when it comes to mental health. Do you think that stereotype is still there? Do you think it's changing, and how do we change it?
I think it's sort of on the same spectrum as we were talking about earlier. I think young men are better about it and are being encouraged to be better about it. I think my generation that grew up, with the Hollywood icon of John Wayne and being tough, and toughness is not asking for help, and figuring out yourself. No, toughness is being brave enough to ask for help, and to understand that you need it. That's being tough. And I think like, I don't know if I'm like everybody else or not. I think my generation's better about it. I think more of us are open to it, but I think a substantial number are not. And that's just the way things evolve.
Yeah. Then, of course, when it comes to something you've talked a lot about is youth and mental health. If someone's kid is struggling, they might not even know that you can ask for help or how to ask for help. So from a parent's perspective, are there things you've learned that parents should take note of, or ways to help their kids and interact with their kids to make sure they're doing okay?
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, I one of the regrets I have with Max was I didn't ask him pointed questions about him struggling. For one, Max held his cards very close to his vest. He gave us very little. But two, and this is where I made the mistake, is thinking that if I brought it up to him, my concerns about his mental health, that he would be aghast at the depth of my, that I might think he was mentally ill, And again, it's like my father with cancer. I'm sure Max knew he was struggling, and knew it better than I did. Yeah. And I wish I had gone to him and been much more pointed the way I am now when I talk to people about it. And so all of which is to say, I think as a parent, you have to ask, how badly are you struggling? Have you thought about suicide? Are you considering hurting yourself? Have you considered hurting yourself? And, there is a protocol there with mental health professionals And if they get certain answers, they leap into action. And I'm not going to pretend I know all the rules, but uh, if you are displaying suicide ideation, like you're actively thinking about it or have actively thought about it, then you need to do something about that. And I wish I had been more point blank with Max about that. Didn't do it.
But again, it's such an impossible topipic to talk
Well,
about,
it's
even though,
terrifying.
yeah.
Yeah, especially for a parent. It's terrifying, but you have to understand, that it's much worse to ask that, and I mean, it's much better to ask that and be castigated for, what do you think I'm not that bad off, than it is to, get the phone call we got. So,
Yeah.
um, you just, I wish I had, handled that better. And again, I know I don't know that it would have made any difference, but I would have been more proactive than I was, which was not very proactive at all.
Well, obviously nothing anybody can say that makes you feel any better about it, but obviously I think it's obvious you have been an amazing dad to all of your kids, and
No, thank you.
definitely to Max for all the years you had him with you, and now you get to keep your relationship going without him in person. But um I hope it doesn't. I think it's good that, as you said a couple minutes ago, you don't let that all the guilt weigh too heavy on you, as hard as that
No,
is.
I don't, and I understand why I did what I did, and I understand, you know, I wish I had done it over. A lot of things I wish I had do overs for. That's just life, but
Yeah.
in the life of a parent, but you get wrapped up and you're chasing your career and you're trying to buy groceries and do all that stuff, and things get lost, and uh it's just can't have a do-over.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. uh so we talked about youth and mental health, and then of course one thing you've talked a lot about because of your career in sports is athlete mental health, and you've done various stories about athletes who have taken their own lives because of their mental health struggles. And then I guess one good thing is that we've started to see a lot of athletes start talking about it publicly. Simone
Yes.
Biles, Michael Phelps, Kevin Love, Naomi Osaka. What do you think we can do for athletes to make sure they don't get to a really bad place?
Well, the stresses of certainly the modern collegiate athlete are magnified by social media, by the increasing glare of the spotlight. Now, on top of that, for the 1% who are going to be making a lot of money in college because of their athletic skill, that's going to put more pressure on them. These people are paying me money. I need to succeed because of that. You got to be really stable and really grounded to deal with all that at that young of an age.
Yeah.
I think colleges understand that, athletic departments understand that, and they are moving as quickly as they can, and at the highest levels anyway, to try to or at least deal with the issue. A lot of times they're coming from behind, as we've had this onslaught of mental health issues, but there are athletic departments that have 5, 6, 7, 8 mental health professionals just there to deal with their athletes.
Wow. And
that's a recognition of the severity of the issue. And
yeah,
there are other programs that are available for, obviously, for non-athletes, for the entire student body. Some, I think, by and large, mental health departments on college campuses are underwater. They're not prepared for the need that's out there. There are programs out there that help these kids help themselves. I was on the board of the Jordan Porco Foundation for a number of years. They have peer counseling programs that they put on at hundreds of campuses across the country. And they help. I mean, obviously they teach kids to look, not only to look for signs in their friends, but what to do if they see those signs. And that sort of thing's invaluable. And until colleges can catch up to the number of mental health professionals they need, the kids are going to have to help each other. And that's awful to say out loud, but that's just the way things are right now.
Yeah. When there's so much going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
I know that you yourself, you've mentioned that you do continue to go to therapy from time to time. That you still do that?
Yes, I do. I have probably more than 20 years now. And I go every 4 to 6 weeks, just sort of a check-in, and find it very helpful. And it's been the same person, so she knows me very well. And we can sort of, I can cut right to the issue rather than having that person have to get to know me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been, I would assume, if you've been doing it all this time, it's been helpful and you've gotten a lot of good out of it.
I have. I tease her sometimes that she said to me at one point, "I think you're my second longest patient in tenure." I said, "Well, that doesn't speak very well for your skills, does it?" But yeah, she's terrific. And obviously it's not a friendship relationship, but we have a rapport that you would like to have with your close friends. And and that's good. Who wouldn't want that, or who couldn't benefit from that?
Yeah. What would you say to anyone listening who has maybe thought, okay, therapy could be good for me, but it sounds a little scary? I don't know. I mean, forget about the just difficult part of just freaking finding a therapist right now, because it's kind of impossible. Right. But
and and it's like dating, you're gonna kiss a frog or two,
Yeah.
But when you find that person who can help and you begin to see the benefits of that help, then you'll wonder why you dilly-dallied. I mean, it's these people are good at what they do, and it's just a question of finding the right person. And you have to be patient with them and with yourself, and until you do find the right person, and then you'll benefit.
Yep. Yeah. You saying, then you wonder, why were you dilly-dallying? That's exactly what I started thinking about a year ago when I started going to therapy. I'm like, why did I not do this 5, 10, 15 years ago?
I know. And you think, but it's certainly with my generation, it was, just, spit on it, rub some spit on it and you'll be fine. Get up, get up and play the next play, do the next story, whatever. But sometimes it's a little more complicated than that. And, we all of us dig holes for ourselves in various ways, and figuring out why you do that and figuring out how to stop digging is what these people are good at doing.
Yeah. I always ask people, when you wake up on a day and it's just not a good one, maybe your grief is really bad, you're feeling super sad or anxious or whatever it is, what are some of your go-to things, whether you call it self-care or coping skills or whatever you want to call it, that you do to try to make yourself feel a little bit better?
I'm trying to think what the technical term is. Chocolate. Chocolate always helps.
Great answer.
Yeah. No, I mostly I just take a deep breath and think, just let this, let this happen, figure out what it is that's making you sad or making you anxious, and then try to do something about it. And if you can't figure it out on your own, then go ask somebody for help, whether it's a therapist or a colleague or a mentor, or, depending on what the issue is, but ask for help, but dark chocolate's pretty helpful too.
Ooh, I like that it's dark chocolate too.
Yes,
great additional piece of information there. Now I knew I liked you for a reason.
Exactly.
And of course, by now you've written an entire book about Max and your grief and your loss, but in the first weeks and months that Max disappeared, you used writing as a way to let some of it out. Is that still, or first of all, I guess, is that true that was a way you let some of it out? And do you continue to do that?
Well, it was absolutely the way I grieved. Was I would wake up, I wasn't sleeping well, and I would wake up before dawn, and I would go downstairs so that I didn't wake anybody up, and just sit at the kitchen table and type whatever was in my head, and just to get it out was helpful. And I didn't go back and read it. Probably I didn't go back and read all of it until I started to formulate the ideas for the book. And it was, some of it was stream of consciousness, some of it was a boring diary, but some of it was really a good roadmap of where I had been and how my brain was working and what I was concerned about at that point. And to see where I am now as opposed to then was helpful. Do I still do it now? Not so much in terms of Max and my grief. And part of that, honestly, Cassidy, has been because I have been talking to people about the book.
Yeah.
That's been very helpful to me, both in not only dealing with my own grief, but in formulating new ideas. As people ask me questions and as I'm talking out loud, my brain starts making connections that I didn't make before I started talking about the book. So in that sense, it's been very helpful. But in terms of, sitting down and typing my heart out in my laptop, I don't do that so much anymore.
If you keep, coming up with these new connections, and you might have to write a part 2 of the book if you have all this new knowledge.
Yes. Yeah. That's a nice way to think about it. And if I can come up with that much more that I need to say, I would certainly do it.
Wonderful. Now we have a few questions from our wonderful friends on the internet.
Okay. Fire away.
Which sometimes are super random and fun. These ones, people got like straight to the point and are serious. So,
okay.
Whitney says, how do you approach the topic of suicide being a, quote, selfish act? How can we help educate people, as you've talked about, that depression can be as terminal as other diseases? Obviously plays into part of the whole stigma around the idea of suicide.
And again, I think that's applying the thoughts of the way we think to that person who's clearly not thinking. The only thing selfish to me about suicide is wanting that pain to end. And I'm sure there are cases where people end their lives for other reasons, but I think the vast majority of them just want the pain to stop. There has been research that people that have attempted suicide and failed, they get, as soon as they begin the act, they realize, oh, this is a mistake. That might be, I don't know how true that is in terms of how much research has been done along those lines. I have read that.
Yeah.
But it's an illness. And again, I think to think of it in terms of them being selfish does not think of it as an illness, and does not think of that person being in the amount of pain that clearly we cannot imagine. Because if we could imagine it, we wouldn't think of it as a selfish act.
Yeah, absolutely. Whitney also asked, what kind of strain did all of this put on your interfamily relationships, and what helped heal those strains?
Well, that's a very perceptive question, Whitney. And I do talk in the book about our marriage and what, there is research that parents who lose a child, half of them go on to get a divorce. Well, David Kessler, who is probably the foremost American expert on grief, said, I listened to a podcast he did with Brene Brown, and he said it's not the grief that causes the split in a marriage, it's judging one another's grief.
Ooh, yeah.
Why do you feel guilty? Or why don't you feel guilty? Why don't you go to the cemetery? Why do you go to the cemetery? I don't, how come you're not crying every day? Why do you cry every day? You have to let people deal with it the best way they can. And Meg and I figured that out. Well, that's we have given each other a lot of space in our relationship from really the time we began dating. Let's see, today's Monday, almost 40 years ago. So, and all we said to our daughters, we have two daughters, Max was the middle child. All we ever said to our daughters is, we don't care how you grieve, but you must grieve. You must do something to get the grief out of your system, as much of it as you can, because if you don't control how it comes out, then it will control how it comes out. And that may not be convenient for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You can't hold it in. Your arm will get tired, and I compared it to holding a beach ball underwater. At some point, you let go and the beach ball will explode out of the water. And you really, that was, in terms of our relationship, one generation to the next, we just said to him, deal with it. You need to go to therapy, go to therapy. You need to, quit your job and, do something else. Whatever you need to do it, but do something. So, and they did it differently, but they both have dealt and continue to deal with it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. Omik says, how do you deal with the anger you feel when you think about your son's death?
I feel
obviously that assumes there's some anger.
Yeah, I was obviously angry. It would have been very easy to be angry and stay angry. I just didn't see where me being angry was going to change anything. I was mad at Max initially, sure, but it was just wasted energy.
Yeah.
It's the Alcoholics Anonymous line, or prayer, give me the whatever I can do to change and to know what I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm butchering it, but it's something along those lines. I just decided, not initially, I don't want to tell you I just woke up and went, oh gee, that's too bad, but I kind of figured out me being angry was not going to help. And it was, I had so little energy. I had so many things to deal with. I didn't want to spend my energy on anger.
Yeah. Carrie says, as a male that deals with his own mental health challenges, I really appreciate Ivan opening up and telling us how he dealt with such a difficult situation. I guess if I was asking him a question, it would be this. How does he now view grief versus how he viewed it in the past? Society often does not allow men to show their feelings.
Yes, well, and exactly. I think we're better about men showing their feelings. I think men are better about showing their feelings. I think the younger generation is better about it. I'm not a very good public crier. I wish I were. I grew up as a public crier, and I was so scarred by that, what that said about me as a child. I would be embarrassed that I cried as a kid. And so I kind of learned to stop, and now I wish I was good at it again. But we went to a wedding Saturday and I teared up. So which I did.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So that's a start. But I felt about being open about grief the way I felt about being open about Max's death. if it made somebody else feel uncomfortable, that was not my problem. I'm sorry you're uncomfortable with my pain, but I'm in pain. And, that's, you don't have to get out and shout it, in your front yard every day. But I think it's people, as I say, if you, we discussed earlier, if you get to a certain age, you are going to experience grief. And if we are more outwardly honest about it and open about it, I think it would help everybody.
Yep. And Shirley says, how do we comfort friends and family who have lost a loved one to suicide, especially comforting parents?
Well, I think a lot of the things we've discussed,
Yeah.
is acknowledging the fact that it was a suicide, acknowledging the fact that it's an illness, it's not a character defect, and those to me are the main things. And to not be ashamed that somebody was sick, even if it's even if society has taught us that. I think those are the biggest points. The more open we are about it, the better we will learn, not only as individuals, but as a society, to deal with it.
Yeah. Are there things that people did for you or said to you in those first few weeks, months, years, even that stuck out to you as, oh, that is a good way to help someone that is just grieving in general?
Yes. Well, it's grieving in general, right? I don't know that there's any suicide specific grief that other than being open about it that I can think of right now. I think, well, let me put it this way. Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook wrote a book about after her husband died several years ago with Adam Grant, who is a professor at Penn and a terrific writer, psychologist, sort of not psychologist per se, but anyway, they wrote a book called Option B. And it was a bestseller several years ago, and it does a great job of explaining how best to comfort your friends and acquaintances who have lost someone. And the two things that I took away from the book that were very helpful and that I really appreciated when they were applied to me by others is, one, don't say to me, is there anything I can do? Or if there's anything I can do, please call me. Because then that's one more thing that I have to do as a
not gonna call
grieving parent. Yeah. Oh, okay,
yeah.
Great. I get to be I get to assign tasks now.
Yeah. Great.
Just go do it. Bring me dinner. Come rake my yard. Walk my dog. I woke up one morning and my neighbors were shoveling our driveway. So just go do.
Yeah.
Don't ask for permission. Obviously, or I'm at the grocery store. I'm bringing you a roasted chicken. Something like that, or a 12-pack, whatever they need. And the other is the theory of the circle of grief is that there are concentric circles of grief. The immediate family is in the middle. And then outside of that are extended family and close friends. And outside of that is friends. And the rule is you extend comfort inward and you don't ask for comfort from someone in a more concentric circle than you. Like people who said to us, I'm really struggling with Max's death, like they expected us to help them.
Yeah.
That was not a non-starter, but it was pretty close to non-starter. Famously, a woman said to Meg she couldn't come to the memorial service that we had for Max because it would have been too hard for her.
Yeah.
And Meg very, very graciously said, well, it's nice that you had a choice whether you could go or not. Yeah.
Oh man.
But yeah, so don't ask somebody closer to the person than you to help you. You go help them, and just do something for them, and they will so much appreciate it.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, I do a little quick speed round of questions that you can answer as quickly as you would like.
Okay.
So first one, when is the last time you cried? You might have already shared about it.
Yeah, Saturday at the wedding, I teared up.
I love that it's a happy cry too.
The wedding was a little bittersweet because it was a girl that Max grew up with, and that was hard.
Yeah.
But she's so happy, and her family. It was a beautiful wedding, and so it was a good thing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys got to go.
Yes.
When is the last time you've had a big belly laugh? The opposite.
Oh, last night, because I'm traveling today, and I picked up my airplane neck pillow, and I wore it this way. You can't see it. Obviously, people listening, what would you say? I wore it vertically instead of horizontally over my head, and I walked into my wife and said, "Take a picture of this and send it to our girls and say I don't understand how this pillow works." And so we both got the giggles.
I love it. What is something you're grateful for right now? Also, I should have said Max would probably was laughing also at that wherever he's watching you.
Max would have just looked at, he would have had a great deadpan reaction to it. Yeah. What am I grateful for right now? I'm grateful for this conversation for a number of reasons. You've been terrific, and you obviously absorbed the book and understood the message of it, and I got to talk about Max a little bit and my grief a little bit, so that's a good thing.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for it as well. What is the best thing you do for your mental health? Exercise,
probably, and dark chocolate, as we said. Yes.
What about the worst thing that you're like, maybe I should stop doing that one?
Oh, I'm a nervous eater, so it's everything in moderation, including moderation, right? But I think the worst thing for my mental health is when I get, quote, too busy to stick to my routines of getting exercise, of stepping away from my computer. You just, it's a question of organization.
Yeah. What is your favorite thing about your brain?
The rhythm that I hear when I sit down to type, to write. I think if you have I've written for a living for more than 40 years, and it's hard to explain, obviously, but I can hear there's a certain rhythm to the words when I get them the way I want them.
That is fascinating. And clearly you're doing the right thing with your life. So good job.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah, it's been fun.
What is something you're really good at that people might not know?
I have a limited, my wife will burst out laughing when I say this. She makes fun of me because if I make dinner, it's generally going to be a roasted chicken, but I can roast a hell of a chicken.
Okay, so you're not buying the roast chicken from the store. I thought that's where it was.
Oh, sometimes, yeah. No, that would be funnier. I can buy a really good roasted chicken.
Pick out the best one.
Yeah. No, and it's not my recipe, but I have toyed around with it, and so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sounds delicious. And then the last one is the most ridiculous, of course. If you had to get something tattooed on your forehead, like we're in some weird, stupid future that I've created where everyone's getting a forehead tattoo, and it can be your message when you look in the mirror, but also when you walk down the street for everybody else, what would your forehead tattoo say?
That's a great question.
Oh, thank you. I'm like, great. Ask this very experienced journalist the dumbest question that my brain has come up with.
No, we had a saying in our house. I used to say the girls when they were teenagers and wanted to get a tattoo. I would say, well, when you were 5 years old, what tattoo would you have gotten?
Oh gosh.
And she said, probably Barbie. I said, you'd still have it. So That was my attitude about tattoos. I would probably do something like rider across the forehead, but I would misspell it. Like leave the W off. You know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you should definitely go with that. That would be great for your career.
Yeah, it would be very helpful, yes.
And then, of course, where can people find you? All over the internet. They can find your book. I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, of course.
Well, the book is, as they say, wherever you buy your books. It's certainly on Amazon. It's certainly on Barnes and Noble website. It's in bookstores. My day job is I write for on3.com, which is a college sports website that started last August. And I'm writing about college football there, and it's still fun.
Excellent. And then is there anything that I didn't ask you or you want to mention about Max or mental health in general or anything else that we just didn't get to?
No, I would just say Max had a terrific sense of humor for somebody that was so quiet. And he loved, I raised him on Marx Brothers and on Bob and Ray, who were a radio team, very dry comedians, to the point that he and I would just repeat punchlines to one another to make points from their recordings. And if you've never heard Bob and Ray, I would, in honor of Max, go listen to, if you go onto YouTube and type in Slow Talkers of America.
Slow Talkers of America.
Yes, okay. That is their signature, one of their signature bits, and it's very funny.
I will go watch it right now, and I will think of Max, of course.
Terrific.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking to me about this, talking to the world about it, writing a whole book about Max, and obviously these are important lessons that we should all know about, and we all have to deal with at some point. So thank you for being so open about it.
And thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
And thank you, wonderful human, for listening to this episode of Mentally Together. I, Cassidy Quinn, will see you next time in the next few weeks because we are just getting back into the podcast game and we're trying to set realistic expectations for ourselves. Okay? So I will see you, or you will see me or hear me soon. In the meantime, go do something nice for your brain today. Go let some of your feelings out, have a big cry, eat some chocolate, read Ivan's book, I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, or go on YouTube and watch Bob and Ray's Slow Talkers of America in honor of Max. Whatever will make your day just a little bit better. Because remember, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. Mentally Together is produced, hosted, and edited by Cassidy Quinn in collaboration with Koba FM, a podcast network that is all about community, baby.